Hello, dear aquarist, dear fish keeper. You should listen to this video when you are dealing with export or import of ornamental fish. Because this study, which is done in India on fish in India and on diseases on the ornamental fish in India, also claims the importance of quarantine procedures when the fish arrive in the country. So follow this video and check on the details which I, will list as most important to see about this study, because this might have a serious impact on the future of ornamental fish industry in many countries. We know Australia already have or has a quarantine procedure that fish have to be kept in a separate fish house to be treated and checked before they are released for sale at the importers. So in this study, like many studies which are these days published, are going in the direction of really emphasizing the importance of quarantine procedures when you import fish. So think about it, what it can mean for you. Think about it, maybe posing questions below with this video. Well, that can have an impact on the future of your business. And I'm sure it will happen. I don't know in what kind of time or term of many years, few years, many years, but already it's going on in the One Health direction of World Economic Forum and United Nations, that they want to prevent any disease, any risk. That's why already in Flanders, wild fish have been banned. No imports are allowed of wild fish because of a risk of losses, but a risk of diseases to be brought in without any control. So I share you this study, which, well, talks particularly about the monogenean parasite. Monogeneans is the flukes, the gill and skin flukes, on exotic Indian freshwater fish, so the ornamental freshwater fish. And the results of the study has been done on ornamental fish from 2019 to 2022. So it's a long-term study, many years, done by people from India, Denmark, and Austria. I give you in short the abstract and what is important to mention for you. This study reports the results of nationwide parasitological survey that was conducted from 2019 to 2022 to investigate the potential introduction of monogenean parasites, the flukes, into India via the ornamental fish trade. A total of 619 individual ornamental fish, representing 27 species from 9 families, were collected from the country's major aquaria markets and examined for monogeneans, flukes, gill flukes, skin flukes. Indian conditions for importing exotic ornamental fish species require a pre-quarantine certificate, a quarantine treatment, which is usually 14 days, 3 weeks for goldfish and koi, and also a post-quarantine follow-up. Despite these restrictions, 26 species of flukes from 12 different genera were detected and identified in 17 of the 27 different fish species. Dactylogyrus was represented by a maximum of 9 fish species, followed by Gyrodactylus with 5 fish species. Well, we know that the gill flukes, Dactylogyrus, and Gyrodactylus, the skin flukes, are very common. And that's not surprising, they are found. The Cyprinidae, which includes Carassius auratus, the goldfish, and the koi carp, was the most parasitized fish family. 13 fish species, or 13 species of flukes were identified, followed by the Cichlidae, 3 species, and the Helostomatidae, that's the kissing gourami, then the live bearers, guppies, mollies, swordtails, platy, and then the Serrasalmidae, 2 species each. The majority of co-transported parasite species originate from Asia, about 65%. And I put this in red. Why? Because they claim something I disagree with. And I'll explain you why. You will see it also later on in this text. What I indicated in red is, for me, a point of discussion, because they claim that 65% of the fish came from Asia, and 23% came from South America, and nearly 8% came from North and Central America, and 3.5% came from Africa. Yes, the fish originally came or are living in Asia or America or South America or Africa, yes. But they were not collected in those areas. They came from breeders. Most of them came from breeders from Asia. Most of them, very few, might have been imported wild, but I will show you later on the species they checked. So in my opinion, this is a real wrong information, because the fish do not originate, the fish which are listed later on, from South America, Central and North America, or from Africa. I don't see any fish from India coming into India from America. No way. This is not part of our industry. Our part of industry is much different, and most of them come from Singapore or Indonesia. I will show it later on. And 3 fish species were identified as the first host records for monogenean fluke parasites. That's the Sokolophy cichlid, had a Cyclidogyrus tilapiae. The Metinis had a specific fluke, and the Bettas had one. That was not studied or found yet in India, so for them it was a first interesting record. In general, exotic populations had fewer parasite species than their native distribution range. That means their native distribution range for these scientists is their native original habitat. But these came from breeders. Most of them came from breeders, or were not wild fish. They all came from breeders, so they didn't come from South America or from America or from Central America. So difficult to compare, to be honest. Okay, but anyway, the article is interesting to learn something about the fluke infections. And I will go for you in detail on the yellow parts. You can follow me. However, the import of non-endemic organisms into new geographic areas has raised concerns due to the risk of introducing potential invasive species into vulnerable habitats where they may outcompete local and endemic species. Well, we know that the endemic fish have a risk when fish are introduced, ornamental fish which are not from that area are introduced in that area. And that is, of course, a concern that we should face and we should put attention to. OFI had some meetings on that in the past with Alex Ploeg, organized that, to be aware that invasive species should be taken care of and our industry should be responsible. And an additional concern has been raised by a series of reports documenting the import of parasites with their hosts. So the parasites can also be a risk when you import fish. And when they arrive, when somebody dumps their goldfish into the river, or a guppy into the river. That should be lessons to be learned. More than 170 species of ornamental fish have been introduced into India via the aquarium trade, and at least 18 of which now have permanent self-reproducing populations in the Indian natural water. So some have been imported and some now are self-reproducing populations in the nature in India. Exotic flukes, monogeneans, could pose a serious biological invasion challenge to the fish fauna of the destination environment because the native species lack the protective immunity against those exotic parasites because they have never seen them. They didn't develop any immunity or protective matters to battle them. That, of course, is reasonable to understand. And they give examples in the aquaculture that Gyrodactylus cyprinidae from native Baltic stocks of Atlantic salmon in Sweden to Norway in the 70s. So it was introduced in Norway and had a drastic effect and has now still a serious problem on the wild fish in Norway. Also the eel trading with gill monoflukes, the Dactylogyrus are also a risk in the wild and in the farms because they are being introduced. So that some things, examples, what happened. What they also claim here, that climate change may further aggravate the risk by providing more suitable habitats for both hosts and parasites. To be honest, did they study 5,000 years ago the availability of parasites in fish and how they survived in warmer waters or in colder waters? 5,000-6,000 years ago it was much colder and they didn't examine anything. So they only examined, how many years are we examining parasites on fish, to be honest? 100 years? 50 years? How can you compare the climate? The climate is a long-term change and climate will always change, will continue to change. In the 60s there was a cold climate, ice age. Now it's a warmer period, of course, and it will become cooler again. That's predicted. What's it gonna do then? The parasites gonna have a different control. In my opinion, the warmer the weather is, the better it is for ornamental fish, for the nature, for the proliferation of life, for the plants, everything. When it's colder, drastically colder, think about it, if it would be 4 or 5 degrees colder, how much nature would suffer. We as people and animals and fish would suffer, and many of ornamental fish will die, and other parasites, and certainly other viruses and bacteria can appear on the fish due to the lack of immunity when it's colder water. So, climate change, be aware. Don't look at it now. You cannot compare with the past. You never did a study on that. Okay, to continue. Sanitary protocol for import of ornamental fish into India to effectively control and manage the introduction of ornamental fish and associated diseases into the country. So they have a protocol. The guidelines implement a twin strategy of first an indicative list of 97 individual species cleared for import and imposing import procedures and requirements. That means pre-quarantine, quarantine, and post-quarantine. These guidelines prohibit the import of any species that is not on an indicative list. So they have a positive list of fish that can be imported, and we should be aware that we follow it as an industry and don't try to import illegal fish which are not on the list. Be honest, you damage your industry. They should have in the pre-quarantine actions, that means before the fish arrive, a valid import permit. That's the first thing. Second, a mandatory quarantine protocol for 15 days and for the goldfish and koi 21 days in a separate quarantine facility. People in Australia already know this. An offense to release fish or to allow fish to escape into the wild should be aware of. That's an offense. And also the direct sale of imported broodstocks into the domestic market is not allowed. Only the sale of F1 or F2 raised baby fish or young fish are allowed, or pond-raised fish are allowed into India. So the next generations, the first and the second generation, not the imported broodstock. Then I read again, since the reproductive capacity of monogeneans, such as Gyrodactylus, the skin flukes, is positively correlated to temperature. We also evaluate the potential risk associated with their future introductions in this new era of changing climate conditions. Come on. Climate conditions always change. And now it's a new era. Yeah, it's now a new warmer period. And there might be some chance that those flukes reproduce faster. And other diseases like some worm infections or bacterial infections. But be honest, the measuring of the temperature in the world, listen, is done on certain areas where there is a thermometer. And unfortunately, those thermometers are standing in urban areas, most of them, where it's very hot due to the concrete and the buildings. A lot of measurements that were done in the past were done in nature, in fields, and those have been abandoned and been dismissed. You can follow many details on that on different websites. If you want, I can inform you personally, but it's not a matter of this discussion. But to be honest, we should be careful when we blame it on everything on the current climate change conditions, because we cannot compare with studies that's never been done in the past or years ago. Did they study 100 years ago the Gyrodactylus? I wonder. I would like to see a study. Please give me the study of 100 years ago, how the Gyrodactylus were spreading in the world. The study area, well, here it is. This was a study area in India. The people from India were recognized their provinces, and they collected 619 individual fish, 27 species of ornamental fish from retailers, wholesalers, and importers. They did microscopy study on the fish. They did a DNA extraction and amplification and sequencing to determine the species. Well, there's all the detail. I don't give that. They did molecular species identification. So many technical details. I don't want to go in detail. When you are a systematic involved in fish, read it. You will like it, but not for my audience. So the results, 619 individual fish belong to 27 species, 9 families, and 27 sampled host species, 17 or 63% were found to carry the flukes. So 63% had flukes, which is a lot. And they identified 26 different fluke monogenean species. And among them, 22 were identified to the species level. That means they are typical for the fish species. And 4 additional records could not be identified at that particular fish species. And these may represent species new to science and will be investigated in greater depth in future work. So they're planning more scientific research on the 4 different flukes they found in this study. And these species were found on the betta, on the metinis, and on the koi carp, and on the swordtail, Siphophorus. And 10 fish, or 37% of the fish species, were found to be free of monogenean infection. But that means 63%, which is very high. In my opinion, it's very high. It's nearly 2 out of 3, which has flukes. Should not be there. Dactylogyrus had the most species with 9 different species, followed by Gyrodactylus, which had 5 different species. And the most families that had those flukes were the Cyprinidae, the goldfish and the koi carp, followed by the cichlids, and then the Helostomatidae, the kissing gouramis, and the life bearers, Poeciliidae, and then the Serrasalmidae, which is mostly the Metini species, which we will see later on. Here is the Monogenean, the fluke species identified in this study. Look at the big list of different Dactylogyrus. See how many different gill flukes there are. That's why I never talk in my cases on fish diseases about specifically Dactylogyrus, because there are many different type of gill flukes. Look at them here. Look, I don't give all the names. Look at it yourself. I will give below the study. And then the skin flukes. Look, there are Gyrodactylus, 5 different species. So this is all studies done by scientists. That's not my job. I'm a fish doctor. So I select the importance that I can identify. Skin fluke, gill fluke. That's it. Most important for us, that we know how to treat. The host parasite list indicating the exotic ornamental fish examined and monogenean parasite found. See, that's the different fish species here. And it indicates plus V that there was an infection, minus V, no infection, and then the star new host record and first record in India. Well, you can see how many fish were infected. You know, the giant gourami, not the glowlight erythrozoanus, not, but many other fish. Look how many had infections, you know, the cichlids, the Cyprinidae, barbs, goldfish, also the puntius, not the Epalzeringus in this case. But then they indicate, I read, let me see again here, that the fish are originating from South America, Africa. But Ramirezia, to be honest, there's rarely imported out of South America from the wild, or angelfish, or maki. No, that's Oscars. They're all coming tank-raised African fish, the Sokolophi, Hemichromis, very rarely, it's very limited. And particularly, I think India is not important from the wild. It's usually coming from Singapore, tank-raised, or tetras here. Black tetra, glowlights, metinis, the Piaractus, South America, it's not from the wild. Come on. Not origin. Here also, the guppies, the mollies, very rarely it's imported from North America or Central and South America, the swordtails, platy, mollies, guppies, or the Pterygoplichtus, South America. No, they are tank-raised in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. Come on. Don't give that origin. You don't know. Well, originally the fish has been coming from there, but the worms particularly are not coming from there. The worms are a different origin, usually from the habitat where they have been raised, or tank raised, or pond raised. Rarely it's coming from the wild and it's kept in the wild. And here we see, well, determination, what species has what kind of hooks. Well, all the different hooks. I don't go in detail. You can see how different all those flukes look like. They're different hooks. That's a way to identify them. And of the 619 fish, which are 27 species, 240 individuals, 39%, or 17 species, 63% were confirmed to be infected with 26 fluke parasites. And most of them were the Cyprinidae, well, like I said, the goldfish, the koi carp, and the tetrazona barb, and the cichlids, kissing gouramis, I said before. And only 2 host species had many different species, particularly the goldfish and the koi carp. They had many different. And the goldfish, Coracerola, was the fish with the highest parasite richness, with 9 different types of flukes. And the koi carp, Cyprinidae carpio, had 6 different flukes. Well, this is a serious problem, should be faced by the breeders, by the importers. Check your goldfish. And here you see the different worms, the parasites, the quantity of fish, 63 goldfish, and they found all those different types of gill flukes and also skin flukes. And the same for the koi carp, Cyprinidae carp, 35 were examined, and see how many gill flukes and skin flukes. A few had nothing, but here again, the guppies, not the mollies, they couldn't find it on the mollies and not on the platies. And here is the quantity of fish with infections, and that's the percentage infected, 100, some are 100% infected, 100% carrying this worm, see 100, high percentages. Well, go in detail if you want. So the high prevalence of co-translocated monogeneans in post-quarantine populations and captive rare exotic ornamental fish species is alarming. Yes, in my opinion, it's too many. Should never end up after the quarantine to have so many flukes, given that they were most likely to be exposed to antiparasitic treatments in the quarantine facilities. Yes, but what kind of treatments and how they have been treated? I put that so much often in my videos. Wrong treatments, wrong diagnosis, overdosage, incorrect treatments, etc. Particularly missing microscopic examination and good determination. Also in the ponds and the pet shops, a lot of problems. This suggests either that the flukes, monogeneans, are resistant, that could be, to more commonly used antiparasitic medications, or that the owners of these accomplishments are unaware of monogeneans, which prevents these worms from receiving the appropriate treatment. Yes, lack of diagnosing, lack of proper protocols. And that's what I try to tell in my Patreon. Look at my quarantine suggestions, what you should do in quarantine to prevent that diseases coming to your sales facility. So you have to have a protocol to treat fish when they arrive, when you import fish. And it's very important you do that especially very, very well. So more information they're giving here. They also talk here an overview of the native geographical regions of the ornamental fish imported into Asia, together with their parasites. To be honest, this fish, Oreas, they came maybe many generations ago, maybe 50 years ago. They came maybe from South America or Central America, who knows. But these fish here, maybe 1% came from the wild, maybe, but most of them are pond or tank raised in Asia. And here they give the beautiful thing, like the worms were imported from those countries. Well, to be honest, they compare it, but to be honest, that's the geographic of co-introduced monogeneans recovered in India. Look at the quantity of flukes here, which is in India found. Similar several fish like Petia or Poecilia latipina or Sphenops mollies which are known to harbor monogenea in their native habitat were not found to be infected at our investigation. Yeah, why are you going to compare wild fish? Well, what kind of worms they have there when they're not coming from the wild? Please check wild fish and then compare and think about it. But don't go at tank-raised fish that is raised in Asia. We suppose that these fish samples were imported into India from a specific geographical region that, by chance, was affected with only species, missing the boat, which we were able to recover in India. Yes, but hey, those fish are not coming from those areas. They came from breeders in Asia, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. And then again, however, identifying the country of origin of imported fish in the ornamental industry is challenging due to the frequent transshipment and relabeling Of course, there is transshipment and relabeling, but most of the fish, like in India, don't come from the wild. For example, species labeled as originating from Singapore, the largest ornamental fish exporter in the world, well, that's not true. I will show by the end. It's Indonesia at the moment, are often collected from other countries before being re-exported. Yes, Singapore is collecting fish, some fish from South America, yes, but most of them from Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Thailand, and brought it to Singapore. And they redistributed very little wild. Ask your Singapore supplier, he will tell you. Therefore, we indirectly evaluate the geographic location of the fish by considering their native distribution rings based on current country level geographical borders. Well, to be honest, I don't know why they mess around with this wrong information. The distribution pattern reflects the numerical dominance of Dactylogyrus and Gyrodactylus species, particularly in Cyprinid fish from Asian countries. Of the 27 fish species, at least 10 are invasive in the Indian waters. That's a problem. Those fish have been introduced into the nature. They should never become invasive. Wild parasitic sampling of these fish from wild water remains to be done in the future. We collect 2 specimens of koi carp and 5 specimens of Oreochromis niloticus from the river in northern India, and we found only 1 monogenean species. This is low, yes, but maybe because they had very small sampling, I agree. It could also be explained that the enemy release concept, which holds that the parasite is substantially lower in introduced areas of invasive species than in their native areas. That's true. That can be a problem, that when fish come in a different habitat, the worms have a lesser chance to reproduce or survive. Therefore, we consider those monogenean fauna of the invasive species detected in our study to be a potential co-invaders, and more studies will have to be done. I can understand, but the additional parasites, we isolated several other metazoan parasites, other worms, and other metazoan parasites, not only worms, but in this case they found crustacean parasites, for example, in the goldfish, Lernia, Argulus, 2 different kinds. They also found in other fish trematodes, cestodes, nematodes, but it was not their object to study it, so they didn't do any detailed study of that. But there is also noticing a risk that the ornamental fish trade can bring in these diseases. So further studies, yes, might appear that worms or parasites like myxozoans or crustaceans like Argulus can be important. Monogeneans, of course, are pathogenic, higher risk potential because they have a single host life cycle. They don't need an intermediate host. They just lay eggs, the kill flukes, or they just are live bearers like the skin flukes, and they just produce babies. So they propagate fast and colonize new hosts in the new geographic regions. So there's certainly a matter of concern because they can survive better and reproduce faster. This may, however, not justify the exclusion of other helminthic species from the regular parasitological monitoring of ornamental fish. They will explain that later on, what that means for the industry. The problem is illegal trafficking of ornamental fish. Illegal wildlife trade presents many threats to public health, wildlife, and ecosystems, serving as a primary driver of emergent infectious diseases. The impact of introducing monogenean species onto native fish is well documented. Yes, invasive alien species. We should teach our industry or hobby, anyone, preventing that risk. The 27 fish species that were sampled, 41% were not on the India's indicative list. That means 41% were not on the positive list of India. They were brought into the country through illegal trafficking. Barbus, cichlids, sokolofi, ternetsi, black tetra, kissing gourami, chlolides, metini, silver dollar, ramirezi cichlids, mollies, phenops, scatophagus. Fish that have been illegally smuggled into the country present an especially great hazard because they have bypassed the import risk analysis and bypassed the quarantine procedures of the importing country, and therefore have a high probability of carrying exotic parasites. This is justified by the fact that 11 of the illegal imported fish were found to be infected with the monogenean parasites, compared to the 9 of the 16, 56% that are available on the indicative list and had passed through the quarantine process. So 72% of the illegal imported fish were infected with monogenean parasites. Very bad for our industry. And they found this. You will see in the conclusion. Yeah, such illegal imports, therefore, may accelerate parasite spread and leading to disease outbreaks. As such, these fish should be added to the indicative list and placed in quarantine on arrival, and their sale should be considered a criminal act comparable to wildlife smuggling and declared punishable by severe penalties. So be aware, this is coming in the industry. This is coming, and it's already happening recently happened with some 2 Flemish young boys who were trying to smuggle wild ants into Belgium or bringing out of the country of Kenya. And they have to pay a big fine. That were not aware what they were doing. Be aware when you import fish, that you know what you can import. And otherwise you damage the goodwill of our industry. Avoid doing illegal acts. Leave it to the crooks. Try to have an honest trade. Import what's permitted by a country. Luckily, laws should be discussed, evaluated. We in Flanders cannot import wild fish, but the Dutch people can, and Germany can, and France can. So the hobbyists can still buy fish from the wild in other pet shops in European countries, and only Flanders made an example. Stupid decision. It means nothing. Wild fish is not a risk when it's well taken care of, and the risk of diseases is very, very small, and the risk of losses is very, very small when it's taken care of well from a good exporter and a good importer. Work on regulations that helps the trade in the industry instead of banning it. That brings nothing. It is widely accepted, that's another red line here that I discussed, that the global climate change will influence the distribution of parasitic diseases. Yes, what happens when it's getting colder? What kind of parasites will maybe then pop up? Yes, the climate changes, of course. And this could facilitate the introduction of parasites into new environments, aggravating the already well-documented devastating consequences on endemic teleost populations following the uncritical import and release of fish and their parasites into natural waters. So it's so warmer now, so now it's a bigger risk. So now we should ban. We should stop, impose more regulations because it's warmer in certain areas, in certain countries. Check the science, which you don't see in mainstream media. It's not warmer all over the world. Some countries or areas it's cooler, and in some countries it's warmer for now. For how long? We will see. Climate always changed. The conclusions. Our study, which is the first large-scale quantitative parasitological investigation of a wide range of exotic ornamental fish in India, established the abundance and diversity of monogenean fluke parasites in freshwater ornamental fish imported into the country. I agree. That's why this study I put attention to is one of the first large-scale quantitative investigation, showing the presence of flukes in 17 of the 27 ornamental fish species, and 26 fluke species were confirmed, and half of which were considered a potential co-invader, coming with illegal or fish that can live in nature, becoming endemic into the nature in India. The prevalence and intensity of the infection were generally high for most of the species studied, which can only be attributable to the inadequate, inadequate risk assessment, detection, inadequate diagnosis, poor management of the quarantine system. That means poor education. You need more training of fish doctors, biologists, and not necessarily has to be a biologist. Can be somebody who is interested in using a microscope and has an interest to do microscopic examination. They can be taught to becoming a semi-professional fish doctor, but become a practical fish doctor who is working in the field. I'm a biologist. I had my training on fish pathology, but I give training to many people working in the fish hobby or in the fish industry, which become very qualified fish examiners doing microscopic examination. That helps a lot. And then when you do a proper diagnosis, you know what kind of treatment you can apply. And when you have to check the fish, you have to learn that. Things I give teaching in my Patreon channel. So 2 key points are made in the concluding this study. First, the ornamental trade, importers and exporters, are a strong driver of transboundary translocation of parasites, in this case the flukes. Second, current biosecurity measures designed to prevent the introduction of exotic parasites into India are less stringent than previously thought, requiring alternative approaches to be explored or existing protocols to be upgraded. Be aware, it's becoming more strict because on this moment there is a lack of control and treatment, lack of diagnosis. So it can be more strict, not only in India. The data generated in this study serve 3 important purposes. First, the data demonstrate the efficiency of the ornamental fish trade in transporting monogenean parasites across continents. Second, the data represent essential baseline information for the prevention and management of exotic monogenean parasites in Indian aquaria and ponds. And third, and most important, the data raise concerns about the vulnerability, the risk of India, that's quarantine barrier to the infiltration of monogenean parasites and potentially other parasites. So there is a big risk, and that's a big concern, that parasites arrive in India. The management of invasive alien species, despite seemingly strong provisions, there are clear limitations. This paper is a testimony. In the context based on the results, we offer the following recommendations. Watch out, the recommendations coming here, and not only from this study, but many other studies will come, are already produced, for reducing the co-transport and release of potential harmful fish parasite with the fish. First of all, separate risk analysis and quarantine provisions should be implemented for fish and pets and for the parasites they may carry. Think about it. Risk analysis. Quarantine facilities should include highly specialized diagnostic laboratories employing a wide range of registered fish health professionals, including particularly parasite taxonomists. Well, to be honest, I would not say taxonomists. How are you going to find those taxonomists? If you know that the fluke looks like a gill flukes, looks like a Dactylogyrus, maybe it's a difference. You don't have to know exactly what species this, and you have to train somebody as a fish health professional. Can be everybody, a fish health professional. Also, a well-educated fish care manager, a highly specialized diagnosed laboratory, well, just a good microscope and a good training in identifying the parasites. Look at my books and my videos. Come on. Don't exaggerate what you want to ask here from the people in the quarantine facility. It's not possible, not achievable, including the parasite taxonomists. How many are in the world here specialized in fish parasites who can and want to help in quarantine facilities? Well, maybe if there is one quarantine facility in each country, yes, you will find one. But I don't know, that's feasible. Molecular genetic identification is based on conventional and real-time PCR, along with Sanger sequencing, Illumina sequencing, and their combination should be used in addition to traditional methods like the microscope to ensure the rapid, accurate, and reliable detection and identification of parasites. Why? Come on. Do you know some more science exactly if it's a gill fluke? Well, we've been dealing with gill flukes. I've been dealing with gill flukes for more than 40 years, not knowing what species it is, but I tell you, I can control them. I know the drugs to use, and that's important. You lose a lot of time. When the test is being done, the molecular and the PCR and all the sequencing is done. The fish already died from the fluke infection. Well done. Come on. Maybe you can help science and give some fish for research. Yes, that's some extra information, but not on the quarantine facility. Forget it. A continuous and mandatory surveillance and reporting system should be developed and enforced. See? Reporting. What you find, you have to report. Like it has already happening in Europe with KHV on koi carp. On all those monogeneans. I don't know. A dedicated Central Institute of Invasive Species Management should be established as a multidisciplinary research, teaching and extension unit to coordinate the management of invasive species throughout India. Another institute. Well, just give good education on what invasive species means, how to prevent, how to inform the market. Well-educated information. Another institute. Well, a dedicated and sustained funding mechanism should be developed to allow for fast responses to and the effective management of exotic fish parasites. Well, give some funding to the quarantine facilities, the people who are doing quarantine. Give them the funding to give training to the people, proper training, and maybe the institutes, scientific institutes in India can train fish aquarists, fish people working in the aquarium hobby and in the industry, which know more and better taking care of fish than anybody at university, to be honest. Those are the specialists you should train and give funding. So, details more below, a lot of references, a lot of details in this study. It is a long one, but I think it's very important when you consider what can happen in our industry when these regulations are strictly imposed on importing fish and quarantine. But it will come. Quarantining will come in the world. I see it happening with the One Health regulations put forward. I think at the year 2030, maybe sooner. I don't know, but that will be implemented in many countries. Or wild fish will be banned in many countries. Or the quarantine facility will have strict regulations, even stricter than already happening now. Well, follow my updates and my studies where I talk about these kind of industrial problems that can arise when you deal with ornamental fish as an importer. Be aware. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching and subscribe.